What's up, Team 116? Let's continue our journey through the Bible, where we have definitely entered a patch of what would be considered heavy turbulence if we were actually flying. The Israelites have been conquered and exiled away to Babylon, facing circumstances they haven't really faced since they were slaves in Egypt hundreds of years ago. Thankfully, they have the message of hope shared by Ezekiel that God would restore them. But while in exile, there's a couple influential events that happen thanks to the faith of a few. So check out this short clip, follow the instructions on the screen, and I will see you on the other side.
The Israelites were now living in exile in Babylon, far away from home. The Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar selected a group of the most healthy, educated Israelite men to study the Babylonian language and culture for 3 years, then put them to work in his royal court. In this group, there were 3 men named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They served the king faithfully, and the king placed them in powerful positions. Nebuchadnezzar wanted his people to worship him, so he built a 90-foot-tall gold statue of himself and commanded everyone in Babylon to worship it. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had committed themselves to only worshiping God. So when everyone else in Babylon bowed and worshiped to the statue, the 3 men stayed standing. Nebuchadnezzar was furious and sentenced them to be thrown into a fiery furnace and burned alive. The king ordered the furnace to be turned up to 7 times hotter than usual, so hot that even the guards who threw them into it were killed. Once the 3 men were inside, the king jumped up and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men we threw in? I now see 4 men, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." The king ordered the men to come out. When they did, everyone was amazed. Not only were they still alive, but they were in perfect condition. Not a hair on their heads had been burned. Once again, the king was impressed, and not only let the men go, but promoted them. Years later, a new king of Babylon named Darius came on the scene. A friend of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego named Daniel, who was also an Israelite, was so well liked by the new king that the other leaders in Babylon became jealous and hatched a plot to get rid of him. They tricked King Darius into signing a law that said Darius himself was a god and should be the only god anyone should worship for the next 30 days. Daniel heard about the law, but chose not to follow it. He went into an upstairs room in his home and looked out the windows facing toward Jerusalem, and he prayed to God 3 times a day. When the Babylonian leaders saw Daniel praying, they told King Darius, who was now forced to punish Daniel. He was arrested and thrown into a den full of lions overnight. In the morning, the den was opened, and Daniel was not only alive, there was not a scratch on him. Years later, after the Israelites had all been living in exile for 70 years, the Babylonians were overtaken by Persia, and the Israelites were allowed to return back to Jerusalem. They were going home.
So my See the Story this week is... That's right, I'm using Dory to represent this week. Why? Well, think about how Dory might handle these circumstances, and hopefully you'll see why. So I mentioned how there are some influential events that happen. The video captures a couple, but skips over a couple that really set up these other 2. So let's take the scenic route and give them a look. So remember that King Nebuchadnezzar, when he was exiling the Israelites, only had the best, most able people exiled. He left those who were weak, poor, not very smart in Judah to basically slave for him there. And after bringing the best to Babylon, the king orders the literal best of their best, the most handsome, most intelligent, the strongest, the most healthy, to be trained in the ways of Babylon to eventually serve in the king's royal service. 4 of those chosen, as you can guess from the video, are Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But did you know that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are not their real names? They were actually renamed with those names by a Babylon official.
This has been another useless fact.
Anyway, they were all being taught the ways of Babylon. They're being renamed to fit with Babylon's culture, and they were also being fed from the king's royal food. And that was where Daniel drew a line in the sand. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. That might not sound so bad on the surface. The king's providing for them, he's helping them fit in with new names, he's teaching them their ways, and he's feeding them well, so what's the problem? Well, remember that saying, it's too good to be true? Think about this a little deeper. The king's giving them a new name, a new identity. He's teaching them new ways, indoctrination, or as the buzzword today is, he's re-educating them. He's feeding them his food, but that food in their culture would have been food used in sacrifices to these idols of their false gods, things that the God of Israel, that our God, expressly forbids. In other words, the king was trying to assimilate them into his culture. The king's goal is to convert these people from Israelites into Babylonians, but Daniel wasn't going to allow it. Now, this is where the situation could also have gotten really hairy. Daniel is essentially defying the king's orders here, which the guard put over him rightly points out is a death penalty, not only for Daniel, but for the guard if he lets Daniel be defiant. And this is where the wisdom and insight of Daniel starts to be revealed, not just to us, but to the Babylonians, as Daniel is compassionate to the guard's concerns, and he offers a proposal. Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. The guard accepts, I'm sure thinking that there is no way they would see an improvement, especially in only 10 days. But that's exactly what happened. After the 10 days, Daniel and the other three, and just to make it easier, let's just call them the three amigos from here on.
I'm Lucky Dave. I'm Ned Niederlander. I'm Dusty Bottoms. So together we're the Three Amigos.
Well, they were all far healthier than the rest, so the guard continued providing to Daniel's request for the rest of their 3 years of training. Daniel and the three amigos put their faith on the line, and the result? To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel and the three amigos, so they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Well, later on, the king starts getting bad dreams, bad visionary dreams, which he wants all his wise people, the magicians, the astrologers, the enchanters, etc. He wants all his wise people to tell him, but he doesn't just want them to tell him what his dream meant. He wanted them to tell him what his dream was, without him telling them. Over and over, these wise people repeated that it was impossible, that only a god could tell them the dream, and the god did not live among them. So the king decides they're worthless, and orders all of his most wise people killed, which included Daniel and the three amigos. When they came for Daniel, he asks for time to get the answer, which is granted to him. And of course, God gives the answer to Daniel, who then addresses the king. Naturally, Daniel shares the answer with the king, who not only spares Daniel, but promotes him and the three amigos again. But that's not what I want to focus on. I want to focus on the beginning and ending to Daniel's meeting with the king. So the king asked Daniel, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." And then after the dream, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery." Think about what's happening right here. The king's initial goal for Daniel was to train him in Babylon's ways, essentially training out of him God's ways. And yet, through Daniel's faithfulness to God, the king is starting to understand the truth of God. Now, why did I focus so much on these couple events instead of the ones in the video clip at the start? Well, first, the 2 main events talked about in the clip are so common that most have heard of them, even if they don't go to church. And second, because these 2 events really set up a key point often overlooked with those other 2 events, and they give more emphasis to the faith shown by the four in those moments. As far as the event involving the statue in the fiery furnace, where the king issued a decree ordering everyone to bow and worship to his statue, look at who turned in the three amigos to the king. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. Where have we heard about astrologers before? Oh yeah, they were some of the people the king considered his most wise men until they couldn't tell him his dream. But Daniel could. And what happened after Daniel did that? He and the three amigos were promoted to be over these astrologers. Now there's not any reason the former king's best would have to conspire against exiles that have become their superiors, right?
Hey, little bro, life's tough, get a helmet.
There was absolutely some political sabotage happening here, but notice how the three amigos reacted when they were confronted with their fate, even through conspiracy. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. They kind of sound reminiscent of Daniel here with this confidence of faith, don't they? Did they know they were being set up? Likely. Did it matter to them? Nope. All that mattered to them was staying faithful to God in spite of whatever setups were happening around them. And as you saw in the clip, their faith was rewarded as God protected them from the furnace completely unharmed, which led yet again to a moment of praise and revelation to God from the king. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Well, over some time, Nebuchadnezzar was slain and a new king took over Babylon. This new king, Darius, changed some of the organizational structure, putting 120 people to essentially be governors over different parts of the kingdom, with 3 people to be over them, one of those people being Daniel. However, Darius also soon came to be so impressed with Daniel that he was planning to appoint Daniel over the entire kingdom, similar to how Joseph became second in Egypt, only to Pharaoh. Well, guess how well that set with those other governors and administrators. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den." Do you see the setup happening? They dug for any dirt they could use against him, but they didn't find any. So, they create a trap for him, going as an entire group to the king, when, normally, this kind of thing would have been handled by just those few administrators to the king. Notice, too, how they only request the decree for 30 days. Long enough to make it seem like it's truly an official request, but short enough that after they trap Daniel, then they know it will expire, and they won't have to follow it anymore. Well, the king, having been convinced it's legit, issues the decree. And watch how both Daniel and the administrators react. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. This group of administrators continue their obvious conspiracy play, all going, again, as a group, to catch Daniel in the act, then go as a group to report him. Did you catch how Daniel reacted? Doesn't he give off Hezekiah vibes here? Remember, Hezekiah was confronted with a hopeless situation with that letter, and he immediately took that letter and prayed to God. Daniel was confronted with a hopeless setup, and he immediately prays to God, when the easy thing to do would be to hide or even just not to pray. But that's not the faith Daniel had. Daniel's faith was all in on God. He didn't know any other way. And as you saw in the clip, the king threw Daniel into the lion's den, upset that he'd been tricked. But God protected and saved Daniel. Daniel's faith leading to yet another moment of praise and glory to God and revelation about him to others, including this from this king. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves, he performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Think about what's happened. The Israelites were being punished for their sinfulness through being exiled as servants to a foreign kingdom. And yet, through the unshakable faith of a few, God was using this time of suffering and punishment and exile to reveal his truth to a people who didn't know him, but who are now being commanded to worship and recognize him as the true God. Want more good news? Next week, the punishment is over. The Israelites are getting out of timeout. But first, now's your time to join the story for this week. So think about sharing, are you in a situation where someone or some people are trying to slowly influence you away from God into their worldly thinking, even if you haven't been recognizing it? How does God show his true character for his children even during this time of punishment? And is your faith unshakable like Daniel and the three amigos? And if not, what's holding you back? Well, this week, let's all be like Daniel and the three amigos, and like Dory, who, no matter the situation or circumstance, they all stay faithful, they all stay hopeful, and they just keep swimming.
When life gets you down, you know what you gotta do?
I don't want to know what you gotta do.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming.
And I'll catch you on the next part of our journey.